All right. Well, it is December of 2022, and it's straight up 12 noon, which means it is ready to begin our monthly Neighboring 101 class. This is the monthly Zoom session where we get together and we talk with leaders in the neighboring movement from all across the United States, and we discover new ways and new organizations to develop this idea of neighboring for both our personal development and for our community's improvement as well. So thank you for joining us live. Believe it or not, this what started out as a little idea 26 months ago on starting a Neighboring 101 program where my goal was to maybe have 15 people talking about the same subject. We've actually got 725 people registered for this class from all across the United States, 28 different states represented in that. And of course, as you can see in today's group, not all 725 attend live. And many of them listen to the video afterwards. But if you're able to join live, we'd love for you to be able to ask questions of the speaker and love to have some smiling faces on here live. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to share two things here just before we get started with our guest speaker in chat. One of them, in Springfield, there's something called a neighborhood council, and they do awards each year. They're called the NOVA Awards, Neighborhood Organization Volunteer Awards. And this is the 16th year for that. And this year, Greene County Extension sponsored a new award called the Inspiration Award to recognize a neighborhood that was really doing things that were inspirational to other neighborhoods, really above and beyond. And we presented that award to Woodland Heights Neighborhood Association. I've just put their website in the chat bar if you'd like to check out what Woodland Heights is doing as a neighborhood in terms of programming and things that they've accomplished. And this is in a middle part of the city, north to middle part of the city neighborhood association. It's an older neighborhood, and they've just really done some really creative things online and in person. And they do a big event every year called Dirt Days, which is sort of an Earth Day focused event, and a trash collection day they call Dumpster Days. They're kind of stuck on the word days, but really creative stuff. And so I'd recommend their website to you to see what they're doing in Woodland Heights. Very innovative. Well, today's topic is forgiveness. I saw a quote just yesterday from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive." That seems appropriate with where we're at and our topic today. This topic of forgiveness, I'm thankful to have learned that it is a virtue, which means it can be learned and it can be improved. So if you come on today thinking this is something you're not very good at, just know that you can get better. And if it's something you don't know much about, please know that you can learn more about it and get better as a result. So I'm thankful for that. Our speaker today is Patricia Plum. Patricia is a counselor and leadership trainer and a graduate of the University of Missouri. She has she has some degrees from other schools as well, but we love that connection with the University of Missouri. She has 20 years of experience with Sprint, and she ran her own consulting business called Plum Leadership Consulting. She's done corporate leadership development training across the United States. She also leads and does training for the International Institute of Forgiveness, which, if you're not familiar with them, please look them up online. They have a very interesting and, I understand, award-winning website with lots of information about forgiveness. She also speaks internationally with her own ministry. In fact, she just recently spoke to some women business leaders in Pakistan and in El Salvador, I understand. She's been an instructor in psychology and mental health at Avila College and at Pasadena Community College. But today she's joining us for an hour on Zoom to talk about forgiveness. Patricia, thank you for your time and welcome.
Thank you, David. Thank you. And it's so good to see every one of you. When David told me of this class, I was very enamored with it. I thought, what a great idea to talk about neighbors. One of the things that he spoke of to me was that when we consider neighbors, it's not just those that are living next to us, because you've discussed that could be anyone, whether it be in the families or whatnot. This particular topic is very dear to my heart. I think because when we forgive, sometimes one of the components of forgiveness is understanding. And so one of my life purposes has been to empower people to understand themselves, understand each other, and in my own worldview, to understand God and to maximize our human potential. So this really fits well with kind of my life purpose. And I don't know how many of you watch Hallmark movies. Anybody here watch Hallmark movies? Okay, at least a few. I see shaking of heads, and then those that are big fans. Well, one of the things I love about Hallmark movies is the ones that are not the drama necessarily, and the mystery ones, but the regular Hallmark movies is many times they show the human element that comes in of whether it's petty things that happen or big things that have happened to people, where people have felt hurt or experienced that. And by the end of the show, hopefully there is this understanding. So I've got to tell you a few little clips, and then we'll get into a little more depth. But when my parents, who in their elderly years, when they had different terminal illnesses, lived with me, and we would watch these Hallmark movies. And so at the very end of the romantic ones, then when the guy and gal would kiss, and I'd say, oh, mom and dad, don't look, you're too young. But of course, they're like in their late 80s or 90s. But we're just so excited when people themselves come to experience that kind of forgiveness. Well, I'd like to start. I noticed what's on the chat, and to David's question about who are the neighbors you find hard to forgive and why. And it appears now, also just FYI, in my classes on Zoom, as much as possible, if we can see you, it really is nice. So thank you for those of you that are showing yourselves, because it's very nice to interact with you rather than blank spaces. But I understand if people are not able to participate in that way. But if you're able to engage more, whether with chat or talking back and forth, it really gives us a more dynamic and exciting classroom. So please feel free to let us view you and your expressions on your face, because that gives us so much more ways to understand each other. So it looks like some people say that, well, Patty said that she had great neighbors. And then Sharon, that you like all the neighbors that you know apparently in the area. And Mary, that it's difficult to forgive those who are not following the rules of the Homes Association. Now, I'm going to take you just a little step, and also just FYI, this particular topic can be taught for more than an hour. So we're really kind of squishing a lot of concepts into a small piece of time. But and we may kind of go off on different tangents according to what comes up in the class. But when we're thinking about HOA rules, let's think about, why is it that it would be difficult to forgive neighbors who are not following the rules? What happens if you're in an association and there are people that are not following the rules? What inside of us, what soft feeling inside of us are these people impacting? And if you might feel free to respond, or by chat or by verbal, would be great. Okay, I see, and I'm looking at just that specific response right now. A lot of time forgiveness is mistaken for boundary infringement. Okay, so there are boundaries, and what do boundaries do? What do boundaries do for us?
Well, they,
Create a fair playing field for all.
Okay, so it equalizes the plane, so everyone is counted equally. Okay, what else?
Well, they can protect us too.
Right, there's a protection. And many times when one of I used to work at Crittenton. It's a mental health facility here in town. There are different Florence Crittenton homes, but this one in town provides a home and a program for children and adolescents in dealing with behavioral issues or emotional issues. But we had a therapist, Mike Reagan, who came out and talked to us when I was co-leading a class for UMKC, actually, in working with school counselors. But that we talked about how that our stages of defense come up in our interactions with other people. And so many times when we might see people that are angry, do you see that often, right? And tell me, in our particular culture, in the American culture, generally, if you see a man angry, let me say it again. If a man is feeling hurt and he shows it in anger, is it more received well compared to a woman who is angry? How do they look upon that? Carolyn, you're nodding your head. Do you want to unmute? Yeah.
It's completely different. I mean, women are more, it's more acceptable for a woman to show any emotion versus with men, it's almost like people expect it to just be anger or blank.
Yes.
There's a huge inequality there.
Yeah, there's a difference, but yet don't we expect many times for men to not cry? Right? But it's more acceptable for a woman to share that expression in tears, correct? Kind of in our culture. Now, in the stages of defense, so we're talking about if people are angry, what is underneath anger? What is underneath anger? What soft feelings?
Can be,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Carolyn?
can be fear, sadness, betrayal, really any number of things.
Right. Okay. And Lisa, what were you going to say?
You asked about anger, right?
Right.
I
Correct.
would say there
Softer
has-
feelings underneath the anger.
It has to be a little bit of hate, or at least
Okay.
dislike.
Okay. Hate, dislike. Okay. Now,
hurt. We see hurt in the
hurt,
chat.
hurt. Yep. Right. Hurt. And Amy is sharing the idea of hurt. Now, Mike Reagan in his stages of defense talks about how each of us is like an onion. And so there are different layers to get down to the core. But the outside is sometimes anger, and anger can be seen sometimes as, to the very extreme, like altercations or violence of some sort. But many times it is a raising of your voice or interactions like that. But underneath the anger are generally softer feelings like hurt or fear. So when we talk about boundaries or infringing on those boundaries, that a part of it is that we're afraid that somebody is moving over, encroaching on our boundaries of safety. And so we're upset and we begin to feel like we don't have control over our situation and our safety is at stake. Now, the other piece is that we could feel hurt, that again, someone has demonstrated something that in our perception, we see as something that again is not safe for us. It may be physical. What other ways could somebody be hurt physically, and what else? What, Patty?
Well, there's physical, there's emotional hurt, right?
Right. And Zach Miller was emotionally. That's right, Patty. And I see that from Zach and from David. So, and it can be spiritually. We can see it in all those different ways, plus in professional ways and legally, et cetera, on and on and on. So when we think about that hurt and the fear, those are the softer feelings. And underneath that, Mike Reagan, now this is another interesting piece. Underneath that, he perceives that the very core of us that is trying to protect, it's kind of the stages of defense, is that we're we're protecting that part of us in how we see ourselves. And sometimes we may have a negative self-esteem where we feel badly about ourselves. And so if somebody is coming after us, let's say emotionally, and discounting us, then we may push back because we don't want to hear that. But it may look like anger, it may look like resistance, it may like any of those things. So all of these pieces are part of the whole picture of forgiveness and reconciliation. And today we're not just talking about forgiveness, but we're talking about conflict prevention, resolution, and reconciliation. Okay, which is kind of a big piece. But ultimately, the way we perceive things and the way the others perceive is really how the conversation is going to happen. So at this point right now, I'd like for you to consider, think about in your own world, places that you hurt and how it first became hurt. And Lisa, to your point, many times hurt will move to hate. But that hate many times is, it seems very, very harsh, very hard. And I know for myself, if I get to that place, it's like, oh, but I don't like that in me. I don't want to hate someone. Anybody else been there?
Mhm.
You know, it's a terrible feeling. Oh my gosh, I don't like it at all. But yet it rests heavy. Oh my gosh, doesn't it rest heavy? And it's hard to get rid of, especially when the hurt is big or continuous, or they never come back to ask for forgiveness, right? So when we think about the ways people hurt, if you can just imagine a continuum, if you watch my hands right now, and just a continuum of hurt. So from one end, we have kind of minimal hurts, minor hurts. What would those be like? Minor hurts. How about Dawn, Sharon, Jesselyn, Nancy, Amy? Echo, Alex, Echo, I don't know how you pronounce that. I want to pronounce it right. Echo,
Okay.
is that right?
Yep.
And Lashana, I think we haven't heard from you, or Roy. What are your thoughts? What are minor hurts? Okay, you can feel sadness from it, but how do people hurt each other in a minor way? Oh yeah, someone has a dog poop in your yard. Yeah, where somebody doesn't pick it up. Okay.
Yeah.
Minor hurt, because then again, they're infringing on our boundaries. Okay. What else? What other minor hurts? And not just maybe your neighbors next door to you, but just people in general, family, people at work, whatnot. What would be minor hurt? And I know sometimes when you're not prepared for a question, it's hard to come up with something right away. Someone not noticing something you did for them. Yeah, dismissing feelings. Roy, what were you going to say?
What I was going to say is, I think that the minor hurts are, it's like being cut by 1,000 little pieces. That it's the tiny little dismissals of every
Yes.
day. And
Mhm.
what happens is that they build up,
That's right.
and we can endure a few of them,
Mhm.
but after a while, it becomes too much and they spill over.
Mhm.
That's how I see it.
Right.
That's an interesting idea, Roy. That's like, because initially when you asked it, I was going to say, oh, like a neighbor that doesn't wave at me. But one time it's like, what's the big deal? But if you've gone years and you wave at this person, they never even wave back at you. It's like a death of 1,000 cuts, right? It's not just one day, it's been hundreds of days. And you're like, what the heck? It adds
That's
up.
right. Go ahead, Dave, excuse me.
No, it's
Yeah, and so, and each time there's that wound. And that wound can fester, and then it happens again and again and again and again. So it's really not just one wound, but like to your point, David and Roy, that there are all these hurts that we've been experiencing. Now, again, I'm going to be just a little tangential, like I said, just because of the time pack here, but I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Covey. They now call it Franklin Covey. But Stephen Covey, he's deceased now by a couple of years now. But one of the things that he would talk about was the importance of recognizing that in our world that we have a tendency, sometimes whether people hurt us or we hurt other people. And so it's really important, whether it's in our personal lives or professional lives, to make sure that we have made a great significance of emotionally depositing good feelings, affirmations, gifts to people to offset those situations. And sometimes for ourselves, because once again, when those people dismiss us, where does it go? Like to Michael Reagan, what was the very core that we were protecting? Do you remember what we said? And again, I'm talking and I don't know, I know sometimes thoughts will fleet out for a minute, but what's the very core that we're protecting? Roy.
I think we're trying to deal with our self-image and how we project ourselves to the world.
That's right.
And I think a lot of us act in an unnatural way out in public. We want to put up a Potemkin village of ourselves and portray ourselves maybe a little differently than we are. And so I think what it is, it all boils down to our self-image. And that's what we're protective of.
Right. So we're protecting our emotional, kind of spiritual soul person with those ways. And then we can also protect ourselves physically, and also those things that are our possessions or territory, plus our relationship. So it's all about protecting. Okay, now, but when Stephen Covey is talking about these emotional bank deposits, if you think about a bank and you have a checking account, you go in and in order to withdraw, you have to have something in there deposited, right? You have to have some money. So whether it's what other people do to us or what we do to others, because we can hurt other people just as much as they hurt us, right? So we want to keep the bank full of reserves of the good feelings, kind of the warm fuzzies. I don't know if you ever heard of those, the cold pricklies and the warm fuzzies. So there's a story about that, but we want to keep the bank full of lots and lots of warm fuzzies, because the world and other people and ourselves will have a tendency to withdraw. And that's really important in relationship. Now, what we're talking about when with a neighbor, something that you brought up, is when we look at hurt, and then sometimes it moves to another states where it goes deeper, and sometimes it goes deeper, and to Roy and David's point, is because that it's been repeated over a period of time. And so now let's also say this, that I'm in a situation, I'll just go ahead and use myself. So let's say that someone has hurt me on one particular way, and then let's just say emotionally in some way, they have gone against my boundaries, and then they've dismissed me. And then sometimes they've cut me off. Now, all of those things are going to be difficult. Now, let's say I go to work and someone there dismisses me. Now, they may say, well, Patricia, you really kind of exploded. And all it was just a minor infraction that somebody did against you. You know, they just didn't look at you the right way. Why'd you get so upset? Now, keep in mind, there are certain cultures that are much more expressive. So just, that's the other thing we have to be aware of. Cultures are very different in how they respond to things emotionally. And that's another way to frame. But what happened is that I, in my own being, still hold each one of those other wounds inside of me from other people, other situations. And so now that I'm experiencing, even in the workplace, even though I didn't really, the little infraction was like no big deal, but I got so upset about it because what I was feeling was not just what was at work, but what else? What else was I feeling?
You're feeling the weight of all those other
That's right.
things that had happened, right? It's the bruise that just keeps getting hit, or just more of it stacks on your shoulders.
That's right. So when we experience it, this helps us to understand ourselves and understand other people. So if we see ourselves explode in ways that are not proportionate to the hurt that we're experiencing at the time, or if we see someone else exploding in such a situation where it seems like it's really inappropriate, rather than going to a place of judgment, go to a place of seeking to understand. That is huge. To understand that sometimes the people react, or we react, not because of that one situation with us right now, but because of other situations that have happened. So that's very key. So in order to understand, one of the things that is important if you're actually interacting with someone, and this is where we're going to kind of get into some strategies. And I call them strategies for forgiveness, mercy, and reconciliation. So the first thing that we have to do before anything else, if we're in the middle of a discussion with someone, and you can see it's not going well, and maybe they've already been picking on you or saying the wrong thing or not understanding. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to react. You know, I might raise my voice a little bit, or I'll get defensive, or I'll just get quiet. Kind of depends on the situation. But if I can stop, and I've got to tell you, this strategy is over the top, one of the very best, most significant, most powerful skills that a human being can ever learn. Are you ready? Are you? And I'm serious about it.
Lay it on.
When I have used these specific skills or strategies in a conversation that could go badly, sometimes it completely turns it around. It's huge. What do you think the first thing is? How about Dawn, Jesselyn, Leslie? I'm not hearing from any of you there. Okay, Roy?
I think the first thing is to listen, because I think most of the time we just hear. And we're spending all of our time trying to formulate what we're going to say back rather than actually stopping and listening. And say, maybe I didn't understand you. What do you mean?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's exactly it. So that's number one. Okay, number one. Stop. And Roy, you said exactly right. Stop, pause, and listen. Now I want you to add one more sentence to this. If you're taking notes, these are terrific strategies, I've got to tell you. And this I came across in some of my educational work, but I love this. Replace judgment with curiosity. Isn't that beautiful?
Mhm.
Replace judgment with curiosity. So when somebody comes at me, and I even have had to use this recently, very interesting. I got to tell you, it just worked wonders. It was so interesting to see how in this one, with this one particular individual that I've been interacting with, and just came across, the guy was totally off base. He was making up all these kind of stories about me or hearing them. It was really, really quite profound. And before I was before in the prior conversations, I was a little bit more reactive, not bad, but reactive enough to say, no, that's not right, whatever, excuse me. But this time I stopped, I paused, and I listened to what he was saying. And I just asked some probing questions, not trying to put him on the defense, but asking him some questions of curiosity. And guess what happened?
It must have turned out better than you expected.
Oh, yeah. But I thought it probably would, because I've seen this happen over and over again in my life and others. Yes, Roy.
You showed respect.
I show respect and I stayed calm. See, I stayed calm. I stayed my vocal tones, everything was very soft. And it was on the phone, but if he had seen me, he would have seen a softness, a warmth, an invitation to a conversation. See, what happened was he did not have to be defensive. His defenses could come down because my defenses, I led with getting my defenses down and talking and having that conversation. Now, like I said, we could go on and on. There's just so much good stuff in all the things we're talking about. So we stop, pause, and listen. We replace judgment with curiosity. 2, we want to summarize. I teach this in my business world, with my families, with organizations. This is another huge, huge, huge place, is that once we hear, then we move to summarize. We seek to understand, we speak in softness, and we give the other nothing to fear. We take fear out of the conversation. It has no more place. It has no more power. They don't have to protect themselves physically, emotionally, spiritually, because I'm leading with basically love, unconditional love. I'm coming in peace. Now, when I summarize, I also check for understanding. And why would that be important to check for understanding?
When you say you check for understanding, you mean you ask a question of them to make sure you're both understanding this the same way?
Exactly.
That's one
Roy?
way. Yeah, I mean, it's the Carl Rogers approach, you know.
Mhm.
I think I hear you saying, you try
Exactly.
to repeat back what
Mhm.
you think you heard, then they can
Mhm.
correct you or not.
That's correct, because that's all about communication. The whole idea is that our communication strategies become excellent, and they become where the sender of the information can give the information, it can be received, and then you have a complete cycle of being understood. And I'm telling you, anytime any of us feel understood, guess what happens to all those defensive postures? Shh. Big time.
Yeah. We're acknowledged.
Yeah, we're acknowledged, and all of a sudden, we don't have to be afraid anymore. We don't have to protect, because we feel like it's a safe place to talk about things. Now, when we are also looking at this, we're going to look to identify the softer core of the other person. That means, remember, we talked about the stages of defense, the anger, but we want to actually we don't speak to the anger. Now kind of stay with me here a little bit. We don't speak to the anger. We speak to the place where if this person is being angry to us, that we speak to their hurt or their fear. Okay, you with me? So believing that underneath any kind of anger somebody is showing, whether it's, and sometimes people can be angry with tears, they can be angry with being silenced, they can be angry with violence, they can be angry with raised voices, but there's an anger, that feeling. But if we speak to what's underneath, we get closer to the core. So what would somebody need that feels hurt? Okay, Roy?
I think kindness. And I think
Kindness.
kindness spreads just as well as anger.
Okay. Okay. Ki-
Zach says they need a hug.
Oh, they need a hug. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. And sometimes people need to hear an apology, right? But
Or to
sometimes,
ask, someone asks, are you okay?
yes, okay, right.
Or you
Because
just-
they need to know somebody cares about them. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and just even understanding kind of
Sometimes they
acknowledges that they've
just
been
need-
heard.
Need to be heard.
Yes, okay, to be heard. And Patty, were you saying that too, that they were
Yeah.
needing to be heard? And so when they're heard and when somebody can apologize, now sometimes people cannot apologize, and that's important for us to recognize. There are some people in life that are very uncomfortable to apologize. They just can't do it. But other people can. And I've seen this for myself, and I think, now, why is it that I can so quickly apologize, recognize when I'm doing wrong, and maybe I've hurt somebody's feelings, and other people can't? And part of that's what we call the emotional intelligence, the emotional quotient that people have and connected with feelings. Sometimes people don't even know their feelings. I mean, people sometimes just do not get it. They're not there. And they don't know how to get there. Most of the time, people do what they can do, and the things they don't do is because they don't know how to do it better. They don't know how to do it different. And so, which takes us to the other place, is how can we reframe them? So we talked about how we feel hurt, how we can feel hate, and then the next piece is, and there are different kinds of steps. And Dr. Enright of the International Forgiveness Institute has his stages. Dr. Matt Harnden, who's also another friend and colleague of mine, has his stages. Dr. Charlotte Rosnack does. Dr. Enright. I mean, everyone has different stages of looking at forgiveness, reconciliation, et cetera, which are excellent, excellent, excellent. But they'll use different terms and they'll get into a little bit more detailed or general. Now, one of the people that influenced my life was when I was at Fuller Theological Seminary. I had a professor by the name of Dr. Lewis Smedes, S-M-E-D-E-S. Do you know the name, Roy? Is that right?
Mhm.
Okay, and also Lisa. Okay, so he was, and I just loved him dearly. He was a really tall man, and he had white hair, and he was just this larger than life person. Oh, I just loved him. And he's deceased now a couple of years. But nonetheless, he wrote a book on forgive and forget. He was one of the leading authors in that area, and then also Dr. Enright, and then Dr. Mac Harnden and Dr. Charlotte Rosnack. But I kind of follow his four. So he talks about hurt and hate, and then it's also seen with new eyes. And I call it reframing. I think Dr. Enright uses some of that terminology. I kind of mix them all together, you know. So, and Dr. Enright has some excellent, excellent tools. If you go to the International Forgiveness Institute, you'll see different assessments and different articles and podcasts. It's just an excellent resource. So please feel free to use that, International Forgiveness Institute. So when we but talks about seeing with new eyes. I don't know how many of you, my parents had cataracts when they were under my care. So we went to the ophthalmologist to get those cataracts removed and have a new lens put in. And to me, this stage is similar to that. You know, once those cataracts were removed, especially for my father, because my mother had other ocular issues. But once those cataracts were removed, he could see like never before. It was just amazing. And so what we do in the area of what we're talking about is we look down and see with new eyes, new understanding. And this kind of follows seeking to understand, trying to understand what it's like from their perspective. For that moment in time, we put aside our needs and we're just focused on them. That's it for the moment. And there are some great words to use. And these are 3 words, one a contraction. You're absolutely right. Write that down. You're absolutely right. Anytime in a conversation that you are genuinely, sincerely able to say that, you're absolutely right. And be authentic, not be playing a game. But say, yeah, you're absolutely right in how you see it. Then what happens once again? What happens to their defenses? They go down. Because again, we are wanting to meet them where they are. Now, again, you have to be careful with that though, because you don't want to, it can come across that you are affirming whatever they're doing or saying. And so you don't want to use it in those instances where it's going to be detrimental to yourself or others, or even to them. But if you can find something that is correct, you know, that is right, or from your perspective, you're meeting them at a place where you can agree. You try to find that place where you agree. Roy, what are your thoughts? You got a question?
Yeah, I've used that, but I've also used, I could be wrong. Tell me how.
Yes. That's right.
Because then you're affirming your own inability and making yourself vulnerable to hear something maybe you didn't want to hear. I think most of us live by our assumptions, and will search diligently to find anything that affirms it. But then something happens, like you're talking about, and there's a paradigm shift.
That's right.
And we have those new eyes.
And once we have those new eyes, that new perception, then everything can change. And so it's not just our head or just volitionally saying the word, but it actually can be heart changing. It can change our mind. It changes all of us when we maybe see things from their perspective in a way that we didn't. We may not agree with it, but if we can say, okay, you know, using all the things we've already been talking about. Okay, so again, asking, you know, so you're saying from your perception, you know, and so from what you see, yeah, I could see that. I understand that. And then once you do that, also, guess what happens? They, many times, not always, but many times the other people then will be much more open to hear from you. Because I think, as you said, Roy, earlier, is that there's that respect. Once we give respect to someone else, then they can respect back. Now, also, in this conversation I had with someone a few months ago, was very interesting because he was being very derogatory to me. It was almost really emotionally abusive. And I didn't spar with him. It's like I wasn't going to spar with him. And I just kept things really calm. And I end up, because there was a relationship with he and his wife, then previous to all of these derogatory situations, I decided in my own head that I would speak about those things that were before all these derogatory comments. So I would say, I want you to know, so-and-so, that I really appreciate the way that you and your wife did this for me. I really appreciate the time that we had together watching the football games. It was just so fun. I really enjoyed that. So here is this man who I think at that point began to feel guilty, because now he was recognizing internally, wow, I forgot about that. She's a real person. She's been a friend. So it takes it out of this kind of like number person to this is a person. And this is a friend. This is someone who I had a relationship with. This is someone who respected me. And now look what I've done. Now, he couldn't apologize, and I haven't confronted him. At some point, probably I should, but I have just kind of let it go because of other complications in the situation. But it's really important. And I do hope sometime I have that, and that he will at some point accept responsibility. And then maybe even ask for forgiveness. But sometimes people don't. Now, many times when we talk about forgiveness, and there are different ways to look at this, and whether people are agnostic or atheists or Christians or Jews or Muslims or Hindu or whatever faith or spiritual piece where people live, there may be different nuances. At one time, I was involved with a help direct program for a conference on forgiveness here in Kansas City. This is years ago in Crown Center. And I developed a panel of faith leaders, and we talked about different elements of forgiveness. It was very interesting. And so we talked about how their belief system, what was kind of the protocol for those forgiveness pieces. So, and that can make a difference too, according to who it is we're forgiving or for ourselves. But and I can really speak mainly just for my own faith. The others I know some, but not like I do my own. So for those of you that have other areas of faith piece, then this may be different. But even if people would not even believe in Christendom as such, the principles that are in there are very applicable to this situation, because the Christian faith really has a lot of this. Because in some ways, Jesus on the cross, and for those of you that may be new, but to that, and some may not, but one of the things he spoke of when he was on the cross and going to endure what we believe as Christians as enduring the sin that he has taken on, is that he said to God the Father, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do." And I'm telling you, that particular principle is huge, and is a principle that whether you believe in those things or not, man, following that is just really dynamic. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because again, sometimes people do not know how to do it different. They don't know how to have a communication. They don't know how to work through conflict. And sometimes they're scared to talk about it. People will have different conflict styles. When I was studying family systems at seminary, one of the things we talked about were, and again, this could go on and on. So I love this. Can you tell? These are passions of my heart. And but here's an example. So if there is a family that has a member of the family that is addicted to something that is really being very destructive to their life, like alcohol or sex or drugs or anything like that. But where there's an addiction, and if there's this 1%, and where it is really a problem. So for some people, it's not problematic in their world. They're able to go to work and do everything okay. But for some, it really becomes an issue. So in those kind of families, what do you think they have to do to protect their family? What do they have to do a lot?
Sometimes they excuse it, or sometimes they isolate the person.
Okay. And sometimes they cover up. They have to cover up sometimes for this person. And so sometimes, and this doesn't mean in every family system that has those issues. So please don't take it that way. Every family, every person is very unique, very different how they deal with things. But I know for myself, because I've had some interactions and I've seen, even working with some families, where they don't always understand what the rules are in their way of dealing with conflict. But many times the rules are we protect our family and from issues or problem, and so we will be close. We won't let anybody in, and we will even lie to protect that person, to protect our family. Do you see what I'm saying? Which is going to be very different than another family that doesn't have that issue, that doesn't really have anything that big time to hide. And so if you interact with a member, if one member from, let's say, an alcoholic family that has the need to protect, compared to more of a healthy functioning family, though all families have their dysfunctions, but nonetheless, then it's going to be very different, and there's going to be friction because they're going to be looking and expecting a different way to resolve conflict. And so the healthy family system may know how to sit down and talk about things. This is what we do in our family. We sit down, we talk about things, we accept responsibility that's ours, we try to adjust, we talk in a calm manner, we ask for forgiveness, we go on, we still love each other, We put a lot of warm fuzzies in the bank account and try to avoid withdrawals. Okay, healthy family system. But if you have an alcoholic family, then you're trying to protect, which is really an element of love too. You see that? But it's a way that they deal with conflict. And so they may go around, be manipulative, do things behind the back. It's more passive aggressive, and they may never really tell you what they're talking about. Plus, they may not be able to talk about feelings. Therefore, and it may be too scary to talk about those feelings. So when we unwrap, when we frame, when we see with new eyes, then we have a different experience. And then the very last, and this is one of the things that I remember Dr. Smead says, and I think Dr. Enright gets to too, is the coming together and wishing the offender well. That somewhere in the midst of us that we are able to forgive that person and say, you know, I'm going to wish them well. I don't want to hold anything back from them. And we can see that when sometimes we will put our best foot forward, we will go ahead and respond as if nothing else happened, because we understand that there are situations, and we may never even talk about it, because we understand that those people don't know how to deal with it, and they're already embarrassed probably. So you're trying to, in essence, protect their tenderness, their softness, their core of their own self-image. In the end, it's all about love. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Hi, this is Roy. I'm thinking, I mean, forgiveness is, first of all, it's a gift.
Right.
So you have to give it, not expecting anything back.
That's right.
And there might not be reconciliation,
That's right.
but if someone's harming you, why should you allow them to continue to harm you? So forgive yourself first.
Mhm.
Give yourself that gift.
Well, and to your point, and this is really important, and one thing I usually stress at the very beginning, but we kind of started in different directions. But it's very important in forgiveness that it doesn't mean that you continue to sometimes allow a hurt to continue. Right. And in order to even talk about those statements, that really requires a whole nother hour or so to really talk about what that sounds like to get to that point. Because it is complicated. And some of the ways that people hurt us, we can avoid, sometimes not. Sometimes we have to remove ourselves. But definitely, it's really important to protect ourselves. No question about it. So is that what you were saying, Roy?
That's
I'm glad you
exactly
brought
right.
that up. Yes, it's very important. You know, it's very interesting. I know of some people that have a wife in particular that I know and have worked with, and she has been physically abused by her husband at different points.
Mhm.
And she says, I don't understand why I keep going back. But I guess I really love him and I forgive him and think he's going to do better. But I've got to do something different because otherwise it keeps on going. And there is a point in time when you can forgive. It's kind of like you don't forget it. You don't keep allowing the perpetrator to do what they're doing. But in your heart, you forgive them because you can reframe it and say, well, this is why they do this. But they do this and it's scary and I don't want to be around it. So you're setting your boundaries. But in your heart, you free yourself from that hate or that hurt or that wound when you get to a place of forgiveness. Do you see the difference? Right?
That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
I think, people need to be safe.
Yes,
But
they do.
people are
First and foremost.
responsible for their own actions, and justice is not denied because of forgiveness.
Mhm.
So whatever penalty there is, people have to pay
Right.
it, but that's
Exactly.
the beginning of the story, not the end.
Right.
That's what you were talking about, wishing well for someone else.
That's right. We can wish them well, even though there's justice that's done. We can still wish them well, even though we protect ourselves. We can still hope and pray that things will change, so.
I think
So
I've
other
heard,
thoughts?
I think I've heard
David?
said that, forgiveness is not weakness.
Mhm.
Forgiveness is not condoning
Right.
or excusing what has happened.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes our culture maybe suggests the opposite of that if you forgive, it's a weakness.
Right.
If you're forgiving, you're condoning or excusing the behavior.
Mhm.
And that's neither one of those are accurate.
Patsy.
Yes, Patty? Oh, not to be a patsy, right? No, we're,
There were all the. Yeah,
Hey, we're not getting you real good. Your signal's weak.
all
Yeah.
this reminds me of a book I read. It's called Daring to be Vulnerable by Brene Brown.
something,
A book by Brene Brown that she read.
yeah, I don't know that
Not sure that.
book.
Yeah, daring to be vulnerable.
Okay.
Daring greatly, I think it's called.
Mhm. Yes. Well, one of the things that I do mention, I just want to reemphasize, is that we do need to stand firm and protect ourselves and others from injustice or more hurt. That's really important. So not to be forgotten.
Well, Patty, I appreciate your time today, your investment with this program for those that have been on live and those who will watch the video later. If you live, well, if you just go outside your house anytime, you're gonna have lots of opportunities to exercise forgiveness. Just living life, right? It comes up. even in the neighborhood context, a neighbor that borrows a lawnmower and doesn't bring it back, or a neighborhood that backs into your car when it's parked on the road and doesn't seem very remorseful over it. Those types of things happen even right where we live. So we have lots of opportunities to put into practice some of the principles that you've shared with us today. And the International Institute for Forgiveness is a great resource online for additional information and ideas as well, and would encourage you to look at that. Just to wrap up the class, I'll just give a reminder that next month, which would be a new year, January 2023, we're actually going to have a panel discussion. We're going to have representatives from the city of Arvada, Colorado, from Peoria, Arizona, and from Excelsior Springs, Missouri. Each of them are leading a citywide neighboring initiative, and we're going to hear how they do that in their different communities, the approaches they've taken to build this sense of neighborhoods and neighborhood connections in those cities. So I think you come away with some creative ideas and maybe some ways that you can implement that in your own community or neighborhood. So thank you for being online today and for joining us. And again, thank you to Patricia Plum for her investment of time in this class. Very much appreciated.
David, can I just say thank you? Thank you, Patricia, for sharing your goodness.
Thank
Oh.
you. Thank you, Roy. That's very nice. That means so much to me. Thank you. Thank you very much.